Hey, welcome back to the Purple and Bold podcast from the Daily News Record. We had a little bit of a break where everybody had busy schedules. About 2 weeks, I barely had a voice, and we just didn't get this done. But we're back with a ton of stuff going on in the JMU sports world. Spring sports are full swing, about to start conference play for baseball and softball, and have had some conference contests for lacrosse. We'll get into that a little bit. Obviously, tons of hoop stuff here with the JMU women heading to the NCAA tournament, and we'll do our best to solve the mystery of the Sun Belt football schedule here. And full disclosure, recording this on a Friday morning where there may be a schedule out later today. We don't know for sure. But even if that happens, I don't know that it completely solves all the mysteries. And we'll get into that and everything that's happened there towards the end of the show. But I'm Shane Metlin, as always, with Catie Harper from the Daily News Record. You're listening to the Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. And like I said, let's start it off with the JMU women's basketball team heading to the NCAA tournament, winning another Sun Belt Conference tournament title. Their second in 4 years after 4 straight trips to the conference championship game. But those 2 years in between, heartbreak in overtime losses, they left absolutely no doubt in this tournament that they were the best team in the conference, really just kind of dominated the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season, including this conference tournament run. Catie, how much did you watch those games down in Pensacola? I know you were out covering a lot of other spring sports and stuff, but did you get a chance to watch those games and just see how good JMU women's basketball is looking right now?
I was able to watch 2 of the 3 actually, like, sitting down and watching them. The semifinal, I was at Veterans Memorial Park for a baseball game, so I was watching just the stat broadcast of it, and I remember texting you being like, "Okay, is it just as dominant of a performance as these stats are making it seem?" I didn't know if it was that or if JMU was making other teams make a bunch of mistakes, but then even just getting to sit down and watch the Sun Belt Championship game, it really became so evident how dominant that team was. And in that, kind of like you said, over the last several weeks of the season, they just found their groove, and it carried into the conference tournament. I know we had talked about it so often about you need to be kind of peaking at the right time, and JMU found that on the women's side, and it just carried over. And even to the championship game, when they race out to that big lead, the lead gets almost pretty much diminished at one point. But even then, it looked like this team kind of knew how to handle it, especially coming back out in the second half. And it was just almost seeming like that they weren't going to let what has happened the last 2 years repeat itself now.
Yeah, I mean, things that had happened in previous years, not handling pressure defense very well. Not a lot of turnovers in this entire tournament. They were really good. The guy Stevenson, who's had turnover issues during the season at times, only had a few in the entire tournament, really handled the ball well. Defensively, they were just incredible. Rebounding, they were incredible. Troy's statistically the best rebounding team in the country. JMU out-rebounds them in that championship game. Just really locked in. And I told Sean O'Regan this, the 4 times I've gone down to Pensacola to cover these tournaments, there's been twice where a team just seemed completely locked in, no distractions at all. Nothing was going to get in their way. That was the JMU men 2 years ago and the JMU women this year. Like I told Sean, like, and he laughed about this, but it's like, I know a team's locked in when people who always are friendly and say hi are just walking right by you with like this laser focus, and they don't even notice that you're there. And like, that's what I saw from those 2 JMU teams. And obviously they both went on and really dominated the tournament and advanced to the NCAA tournament. And that's a little bit of a segue into, I think we're going to see this JMU women's team get at least a 12, probably not an 11, because I think that's going to be a lot of the last at-large bids get 11 seeds. They might be worthy of an 11, but I think they're going to get a 12 seed, which might make for, like the JMU men, a winnable first-round game in the NCAA tournament when we get there. We'll find out for sure on Selection Sunday here in a few days, but it's really setting up to be a memorable season for JMU women's basketball.
Yeah, and like you said, to get that 12 seed would be big for them, but I think a lot of that does come down to what they did in the conference tournament. When you knock off the number 1 seed by the magnitude that JMU did with Georgia Southern, that catches people's attention because like I said, with just kind of stat watching that game from the baseball game, there was a lot of chatter in the baseball press box where none of us had the game on. I think someone may have had it on a laptop, but even the TV in the press box had the baseball game on so we could watch replays if anything was challenged. So, but we start talking about like, oh my God, do you guys see the score right now? And someone, would come into the press box and be like, hey, did you see the women's team is up like 20 on Georgia Southern right now? So it was one of those that it was catching attention from people who were working and paying attention to a different game. So it's obviously catching attention of, these other higher ups who are making these decisions on where to rank people. But then to translate that and go into the championship game against Troy and have, another really, really good start and a really dominant from start to finish performance. I think it's catching kind of the national attention or from the people who make those kind of decisions in the best way possible for JMU.
Yeah, and for all the people who are upset about where Sunbelt men's basketball is right now and like whether that tournament format with the ladder bracket and the buys all the way to the semifinals and things is working on the men's side, it absolutely is on the women's side. And it's a really good mid-major league in women's basketball. So like you said, those are important wins in the conference tournament, not just to get the automatic berth, but they beat 2 teams that were right around 75 in the country when they played them. And JMU's entering the NCAA tournament with a net of 45, better than last year when they went 18-0 in the conference and was on the bubble for an at-large bid. Don't have to worry about that at all this time. But that's why I think they should be at least a 12 seed. And for those who aren't really familiar with the women's basketball tournament, 1 through 4 are hosts. It's not all neutral like it is on the men's. So if you're a 13 seed, you're playing a road game against a 4 seed, a really good team. We saw that 4 years ago now, when the JMU women went to Ohio State. They get up by 16 in the first half, and then the crowd really gets into it and brings Ohio State back. And it was just a true road game. But the second game in that tournament is North Carolina playing, I think, St. John's. They're the 5 seed. Guess who everybody's rooting for in that one? It's that 12 seed. So if you get that, it could be absolutely huge. And, looking at the bracketologies that are out there, most of them have JMU as a 12 seed. And the other benefit of that is probably sends you someplace like College Park, Maryland, or Morgantown, West Virginia, which a lot of JMU fans can get there. So it'll be an interesting, relaxing, just much more fun Selection Sunday for JMU women's basketball this time around. They're going to have a watch party with people invited to the AUBC, and we'll see where they end up.
Yeah, you can always tell when it's going to be a relaxing one. Obviously, the automatic bid makes it that, but when fans are invited to the watch party, usually it's a good sign that they know something good is happening, because obviously there are some private watch parties for some of these teams where they don't really know where they're going to go and stuff like that. But this team has just been, watching it throughout the season. Everybody pays attention to Peyton McDaniel and how good she is, and obviously so, she's earned that. But this season really, really, I think, highlighted Ashanti Barnes and what she was able to do, and to have her perform the way she has for the majority of the season, to then have Peyton McDaniel become Pensacola P at the right time every single year. It just made such a dynamic team that I think it will be interesting to see how this group carries it over into the NCAA tournament now, because it really does seem like they are playing their best basketball right now.
Yeah, you talk about Ashanti Barnes, and Peyton was obviously going to win the most outstanding player of the tournament at 28 points in the championship game, double doubles. Just continue to do what she always does in Pensacola, and very worthy of it. You could have made a case for Ashanti Barnes. I mean, it probably hurt her a little bit. She got those 2 fouls in the blowout quarterfinal win. and sat out early, and then like he just never really brought her back because they were winning by so much. She got the rest that round, so not great stats in the first one, but those second two games, the semifinals and the finals, she was unbelievable. Not just scoring and rebounding, which you expect for her, great stats there, double doubles. One of the best back-to-back defensive performances I've ever seen. Like just completely shut down. I mean, I think Peyton McDaniel didn't win the Sun Belt Player of the Year this year. I think everybody after this last week believes she was the Player of the Year. And part of that is because Ashanti Barnes just absolutely shut down Kashia Anderson, who did win Player of the Year from Georgia Southern, just completely took her out of the game. And then the next night does the same thing against Zay Dyer, who was another Player of the Year candidate and a first-team All-Sun Belt player. The last two times those two have gone against each other, going back to last year when JV played Troy, Zay Dyer is 3 for 27 from the floor with Ashanti guarding her. She's a 45% shooter for her career. She's a first-team All-Sun Belt player, and that's two times in a row that Ashanti Barnes has just dominated that matchup. And like you got to give her a ton of credit. JMU is not where they are without her. As much attention as Peyton gets, and it's all deserved. Like Ashanti Barnes, she might be the second best player in the conference, honestly.
Yeah, and I mean, I just go back to the WBIT last year where JMU ultimately loses, and it's without Ashanti Barnes, and that game spirals. So I think she is just such a difference maker on the court that maybe it did take a game where she wasn't playing for people to kind of realize, oh, she is a difference maker for this program, and she takes some of the pressure off of Peyton McDaniel. But to see the two of them play the way they did was just. I mean, even in the final, watching it from Harrisonburg and listening to the announcers kind of describe what it's like when Peyton McDaniel makes a three was, I think they described it as like, it's almost like she's whispering to the basket. Like it just, when Peyton McDaniel is on and her threes are falling, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a prettier shot. Like, because it never seems like it needs the backboard. It just goes, it's almost nothing but net every single time. And to see that kind of performance in a championship game, I think was very telling of a program and of a team made up of players who have tasted that other side and that loss one too many times for their liking to where they weren't going to let it happen.
Yeah. We'll break down what we find out like where the bracket is and get back on here pretty early next week so we can really break down what that tournament matchup is going to be like for JMU and where they stand. And what Ashanti Barnes and Peyton McDaniel could do to help try to lead JMU to a first round victory. Like I said, we'll get more into that next week. Let's talk a little bit about the men's basketball team who didn't have the same kind of run, didn't have the same kind of season. They win one game in the conference tournament, lose in the third round to Southern Miss. A Southern Miss team that got pretty hot there for a while, ends up taking out some other teams and looked really good before kind of running out of gas in that tournament. But, 18-15 overall record for JMU men's basketball, 500 in conference. More was expected of them. It's not a terrible season, especially by the long-term standards of JMU men's basketball. Like, it wasn't that long ago that people would have gotten really excited about an 18-win season. But right now, that's not where they are after winning 20 straight for a few years in a row and are 20 or more games for a few years in a row. And yeah, it's an off season that's going to be interesting because I don't think they can continue to kind of operate the way they did in previous off seasons where you're basically just rebuilding the entire roster. I think you're going to see a huge focus on trying to get at least a few players to come back for a variety of reasons, but continuity is a big one. And, just not having to completely rebuild the roster year after year seems to make a huge difference at this level.
Yeah, I feel like we've talked about it over the last couple of weeks. I mean, you look at that Troy program that didn't have to bring in a bunch of new faces, and look what they were able to do once, not even just once the conference tournament started, but throughout the season. They had those guys back and the continuity, and it obviously paid off on the court. So for JMU, that focus needs to be, and is it it's probably some of it is obviously going to be NIL and, giving out some money to players to make sure that they're staying put in Harrisonburg. And then, obviously you're probably in this day and age, you're not going to return every single guys, but you need to make sure that you're bringing back guys that you really can build around. And like you said, not just trying to create a complete roster from scratch, because, this time next year, there is going to be another Troy-like team where they're able to return a good amount of players. And if you're JMU, you want that to be your own program.
Yeah, and I think for JMU, the key is going to be kind of trying to identify and retain the people who are going to be like you talked about with Troy, a Thomas Dowd or a Victor Valdez. These guys were solid role players for a good Troy team last year. But they identified that those are guys they wanted to bring back and let them expand their roles and become all conference type players. At Marshall, Wyatt Fricks was completely fits that description. Never put up huge numbers before this year, but he comes back for a third or fourth year in the system and does great. So I think for JMU, it's going to be identifying which of the guys that have eligibility remaining you think are going to be like that. Is it a Preston Fowler who's a freshman and got into the starting lineup at the end of the year and, not huge numbers, but obviously pretty highly recruited and has talent. Christian Brown, similar thing for a freshman and a big man. Do you put a ton of time and effort into trying to keep a Justin McBride when he's going to get huge offers other places? Or do you really start to lock in on is Eddie Ricks the guy who might make that jump? That there are a few, and then there are players who are hurt for JMU this year who we didn't really get to see a ton of, but we know there's some talent there. Are you trying to get those guys back? Do you think they're going to be healthy? There's a lot of questions that both the coaching staff has to identify which players they think are going to make the jump and then turn that over to Cliff Wood and the people who are negotiating the deals. And I think that's just been the learning curve for the men's basketball staff is how to do this. Not only identify players and coach players, but then negotiate with them. It's not something that anybody learned how to do when they were a young assistant coach 5, 10, 15 years ago.
Negotiating was not a college coaching crash course at all, because it's just, when you get to the professional ranks, you really have your general manager and team presidents and all of that being involved in the contracts and stuff, and the coaches aren't even worrying about it. But now at the college level, yes, you have a general manager, but like at JMU, it's Cliff Wood. He's handling that for everybody right now. So if you're a coach, you still need to be, aware of how to handle it and how to do it. And again, it's not something that they're starting right now. They've been thinking about this obviously for several weeks and preparing for the transfer portal. Spradlin and his staff obviously know what position they're in and kind of what JMU on paper can potentially be for some program or for some players. They know that it's a place that, some people want to come here and play. Some people want to come here and use it as an opportunity to get to that next level and at a bigger school. So they've obviously been preparing for it for a while, but it is one of those things that it's going to start picking up in speed now over the next couple of weeks as more teams see their seasons end.
Yeah, and I think one thing that may separate JMU if they learn how to do this kind of offseason is, they have some resources. It's obviously well funded. They have people who are interested in making sure basketball is good. So I think they have the resources to not only keep, 3 to 5 contributors from this year's roster, then to maybe go out and get 1 or 2 difference makers in the transfer portal. They're going to have to get some people in the transfer portal. And that may be a different thing too, is, as opposed to going out and getting 5 players that you're going to kind of spread your money around to and hope you get good production for them. Do you maybe go with 1 or 2 that get paid a little bit more and are going to be potentially all conference players? And then you're filling out the roster with people that you hope you just get great value out of. I don't know for sure, but I think JMU has that option, maybe even more than Troy or Marshall, who kept people around but didn't really bring a lot of transfers in. So that'll make it for an interesting offseason for JMU just to see first when maybe we start seeing announcements about somebody say, hey, I'm back. Maybe we'll see some of those posts soon, because some of these discussions began even while the season was going on, not necessarily with Preston Spradlin and the coaching staff, but, Cliff Wood and Scooter Rinkin and some of the people who are the front office, quote unquote, in there, trying to get feelers about how interested people were to come back. And supposedly those conversations had been going pretty well. We'll see how soon maybe we start to hear from some of them, because we're not going to hear about transfers for a while. The portal doesn't open until April 7th, I believe. We're not going to hear about anybody signing transfer-wise, but we may hear some announcements that people want to come back.
Yeah, it's probably going to be like the football team, where in the couple days leading up to that January 1st, 2nd, I think it opened on the 2nd. Yeah. See, I've already put the transfer portal for football behind me. But in the days leading up to the football transfer portal opening, that's when you started to see names kind of share that, hey, I'm coming back. You saw, guys like Zach Greenberg say he was coming back. And then even once the portal opened, it was still kind of in that early portion where you started to see even more names. I think Petaway, I think his came right before the portal opened, that he was coming back. So you have it. I would expect it to be pretty similar to what happened with football. So when you get into the next couple of weeks, maybe seeing a post here or there from different guys that, see the potential in what they can build at JMU and deciding to come back. And like you said too, of potentially going out and getting, that one big player that can be a difference maker. I think it's interesting too, because JMU obviously has, they don't have the money that, a bigger school is going to have, but they still have the resources to really draw in a player when it comes to facilities and crowd engagement and things like that, or that, could potentially lure someone in if it's not just about the money, even though money is obviously going to play a part in it.
Yeah. And, you mentioned football portal. One thing we learned there too is, Preston Spradlin has recruited some non-Division I players in the past, and those players may be the first we see in the portal, because they pushed the date back for Division I. So we won't see any announcements of a transfer signing with JMU until at least a couple weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, I guess. But we may see announcements of people entering the portal or deciding to stay, or maybe some of those NAIA Division II, Division III transfers that Preston Spradlin has had some luck with. So there's going to be things to watch here coming up. Things to watch in person. Catie has watched in person here recently has been all the spring sports, lacrosse, softball, baseball, mixed bag to a degree, I think is kind of the way to describe the early season. I feel like, some of these teams have a chance to do something in conference play now that they're getting in there after playing pretty tough non-conferences. But you've seen them all in person. Just what are the vibes for spring sports right now?
Okay. We'll go through them. We'll start with lacrosse. First of all, the kind of thing that they all share right now is they're all pretty young teams. I would say the two youngest right now are probably baseball and lacrosse. And I had someone reach out and ask if this is going to be a down year for the lacrosse program. And I told them, I'm like, it's not necessarily going to be a down year, because they still have a very clear edge in conference play to make the NCAA tournament. But it is going to be a growing pains year of like figuring out what this team exactly is now that they no longer have that kind of star player and Maddie Epke. And it's going to be, and it has been more of a team approach than just kind of funneling it through one player as it has in the past. And I think there's a lot of potential for this program moving forward into next year. They dropped the game to Johns Hopkins, which was it was probably such a heartbreaker for them, because Johns Hopkins at the time was, I think, ranked number 9 in the country, and JMU led for a majority of that game and dropped it late. But for lacrosse, there are people in place that I think this program can be very, very good over the next couple of years. I've been very impressed with Abigail Beatty in net, and this is only her second year in Harrisonburg. She's been very impressive, and I think, you look at the defense, that whole group can come back next year. A lot of the attack can come back next year. The midfield, a lot of them can come back. So that is a team that still very realistically will be in the NCAA tournament if they do what they're supposed to do once American Conference play begins. So that one is the one I would say, yes, they have a losing record. Probably not too much of a concern, just because they do kind of outpace the rest of their conference pretty well. Softball and baseball, like we were talking about it before we started. I've had such a hard time getting a read on this baseball program right now. And it kind of is similar to the softball team where both teams have the offense to win games. But then when they have that offense, it seems like the pitching performance is not there. And at least on the baseball side, your weekend rotation right now seems to be very strong and consistent with Max Cool on Friday, Luke Alexander on Saturday, and Tyler Lutz on Sunday, which two of those guys are freshmen and have pitched very, very well. But it's like once you get out of that starter role, the bullpen has been shaky at best occasionally. I think we saw that on Sunday in the series finale against East Tennessee. It was, Tyler Lutz only gives up one earned run through, I think he went like 5 1/3. And JMU ends up getting run rolled in that game because it kind of just spiraled in the 6th inning. And then on the softball side of it, you know, and this is actually my first time really going through a season and interviewing Lauren Laporte and talking with her. She is very honest when she is not happy with something. And it almost sometimes feels like she knows that maybe her players will see it if I post it or something. So she is very upfront, and she has been not happy with the performance of Peyton List and Kirsten Fleet in the circle. And she was not happy after the midweek loss to Liberty and pretty much called them out of saying they're not freshmen anymore. This is unacceptable. They need to be better. So it's definitely a group that's being challenged by their head coach publicly.
Yeah, which I found interesting too, because, Peyton List has had a couple of games against really good teams where she's pitched really well, which at the time against Texas Tech and Penn State, just seeing a little bit of it on TV, seeing the stats, I was like, okay, she's taken losses. And then, she didn't take a loss against Penn State, but she took a loss against Texas Tech. But it's like, but if she pitches like that in the Sun Belt, they have a chance to win a lot of games. But it just hasn't been consistent from her. Is she somebody who, as more of a power pitcher than Fleet, is she somebody who has a chance to overwhelm the Sun Belt, or is Lauren on it when she's like just not happy with where they are right now?
I think Laporte's biggest thing right now is that she's not happy with how they're letting the umpires affect them in the circle. And it was pretty noticeable against Liberty in the midweek that there were a couple times that Peyton List did not agree with what was called, and it visibly upset her. And you could kind of see her getting taken out of her approach. And that's something that Lauren Laporte said that needs to be fixed, and that it's just not acceptable at this point in her career to have it where something that, she thinks is a strike being called a ball. Lauren Laporte is like, hey, this can't be affecting you and taking you out of your rhythm as much as it is right now. And it's something that, Lauren had said before the season that she felt that Peyton List had gotten better at that, and it had been a problem for her in the past, but she felt like, hey, she's really worked on kind of settling down, taking deep breaths in the circle and just settling into her game. But through a couple of these games, it hasn't necessarily been the case. And you brought up that Penn State game, and I think the Liberty performance coming like only a couple days after that Penn State game is maybe what made it a little bit harder for Lauren Laporte to accept it, because she even said post-game, she's like, we know she can beat ranked teams in the circle. Like, she did it against Penn State. She was lights out against Penn State. And she's like, but she comes out here, gets the run support from her teammates because they put up 8 runs and still lose this game. And she's like, you can't have that kind of support from your offense and not get the win.
Yeah. So I guess to kind of recap spring sports, we think Jamie Lacrosse is going to be fine in conference. We're not quite sure about softball and baseball. It could kind of go either way at this point. As they get
I will say, I don't think JMU is going to finish 13th in the Sun Belt in baseball.
Yeah.
I think their offense is better than that. I think JMU baseball should make the conference tournament this year. I could be eating my words in about a month, but seeing what they almost beat a good Virginia Tech team. They've gotten some run rule wins. So for anybody that was very upset about that 13th in the Sun Belt preseason poll, I do think they're going to finish better than that and have a chance to be in that top 10 where they play in the conference tournament this year.
Yeah. And well, as we teased earlier, the football discussion and the football, I guess, drama to a degree never ends. As we sit here right now, we're in another situation where the Sun Belt and Conference USA, as they did a few years ago when teams joined the Sun Belt, they expanded and JMU joined with a few Conference USA teams. They can't seem to agree on who's in the league and who's not, and who's on schedules and who's not. So to recap it right now, where it stands, what we know. There was reported by others who cover the league that the Sun Belt was probably going to release their football schedule on Friday with Louisiana Tech on it. I don't know if we're 100% sure that Louisiana Tech was going to be on it, but it does sound like that the schedule was supposed to come out on Friday. It still might come out here today.
It hasn't come out yet. I've been checking my phone.
Yeah, it still might come out today. But that appeared to prompt Conference USA to fairly late last night put out what kind of looked like a haphazard release, because it was basically just posting a PDF of a master schedule without a lot of other fanfare around it. They post it. It includes Louisiana Tech on the Conference USA schedule, similar to what happened in 2022, where they kept ODU, Southern Miss, and Marshall on their schedules, even though they all intended to be in the Sun Belt. The Sun Belt went ahead and released a schedule with those teams later on. We'll see if they do it the same way this year. It's interesting. I know of at least one Eastern team that kind of thought Louisiana Tech was going to be one of their Western games, and they've seen their schedule, and it's not. I don't know for sure what that means. I don't. But it's going to be very, very interesting to see what ends up happening when the Sun Belt releases its football schedule, and if Louisiana Tech is on it, and if we have another situation where one of those conferences has to release an amended schedule here in a few weeks. I mean, the other side of this is there's a hearing set in court for March 19th. Just later this week.
Next week, yeah.
Yeah, like coming up, like next.
No, yeah, next week.
Next week, yeah. This is Friday. I'm still like completely don't know what day it is.
You're still in Central Time. It's okay.
Yeah, but yeah. So this may have gotten resolved in court within a week from now. But the conferences seem to be rushing out their schedules. It's another mess. It's sort of entertaining to sit back here if you don't have to we just go where they tell us where the games are and when they are. So sort of entertaining when you don't have to sort it out. But crazy this is happening once again.
Yeah, I saw so many JMU fans being like, man, I really want to plan my fall around games and where they need to be. And for me, at least, this is where I benefit of being kind of a last second planner. Like when I look back to last season, I think I booked my hotel in Louisville a week before the game. I think I changed Airbnb bookings in Oregon at least 3 times within a week before that game. So I'm a last second planner. So for me, this isn't that stressful. Like you said, we have to go and be where we have to be when they tell us to be there. So it is kind of not too much of a stressor in our lives right now. But yeah, I can see how for some of these people who are making these plans of okay, do I have to take off work to get to this place? Yeah, it's probably a little annoying. I think the ways I described it to you before we started recording, it feels like a toxic breakup right now. I also feel like maybe Bravo should look into a reality TV show between Conference USA and the Sun Belt. I think, there was one other one that I just now thought about and I can't remember what it was, but it's very drama filled, and it is kind of wild how much, in the grand scheme of things too, it honestly probably would have been easier for everyone involved for Conference USA to let Louisiana Tech join the Sun Belt this year. That way both conferences are scheduling both conferences have an even amount of teams. It makes scheduling so much easier. Obviously, it can be done with an odd number of teams, but it's a lot more enjoyable for schedule planners to do it with even teams. So it is so interesting to me, and that's kind of been what I've been stuck on like the last couple months, is like Conference USA is willingly making this harder for themselves.
Yeah.
Obviously money is involved in it and buyout is involved in it, but it's like they willingly made it harder, made this schedule and released it, hoping that it maybe gives them the upper hand before they go into a court battle. But yeah, wild. College football, I know we joke about it all the time, but it never does seem to stop the
Yeah,
drama.
well, like you said, in college football, college sports in general, it does seem like the money sometimes leads to you doing things that really don't make any sense otherwise. And yeah, that's what the hearing coming up is about, is how much Louisiana Tech ends up paying to get out of Conference USA. Really is the bottom line. Some teams have gotten out of there relatively cheap. Apparently, UTEP left for the Mountain West and didn't fight them too much on the money, which is what made them want to have Louisiana Tech pay the full amount. So we'll see what's end up happening. I mean, Louisiana Tech is not the most financial stable program in Conference USA or the Sun Belt, whichever one they actually belong to at this point. You know, the money's, I think, a pretty big issue for them too. So we'll see how it ends up playing out, but we will probably have a football schedule.
We'll have a football schedule by August.
We may have one pretty darn soon, but whether it's the one that actually ends up being the actual schedule, well, we might have to wait and see on that. But
we'll have we'll have a playable football schedule by August.
That's where that stands. Oh, in the meantime, like I said, we're going to come back, do this, try to do it pretty early next week so we can get a full preview of the JMU women's basketball team heading to the big dance, find out where they're going, whether they're facing Kenny Brooks's Kentucky team, as at least one bracketology has them doing. Stories would write themselves there. So we'll see what ends up happening, but we'll have plenty of more women's basketball talk, more spring sports talk, and we'll probably have something else to say about this football schedule by then. So in the meantime, you've been listening to Purple and Bold podcast from DNR Media. Please like, subscribe, and all that stuff, and tell your friends to do so too. And thanks for listening.